Hey guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for listening to our content, and please like and subscribe. Before we get to the podcast, if you have middle school or high school kids that play sports and you don't want to fundraise like me, we got you covered. My buddy Chris Carneal owns Booster. Chris?
We help schools and sports teams raise funds in a super fun and engaging way. In fact, the last 22 years, we've raised $750 million, and we can't wait to help you. Choose booster.com.
Welcome back to Peer Athlete. I'm Jeff Francoeur. I got to be remote today. My little guys got strep, but I am with Britt and Brad in the studio and excited about today's guest. You know, sometimes we talk to different athletes, different, coaches, but today I'm excited because it's a guy that I've actually enjoyed following, and now I kind of do what he does in the media world, but went to Radford University where he met his lovely wife and started in NASCAR with ESPN. Of course, now all over college football, host the Marty McGee Show. Marty Smith, thank you for joining us, my man.
Jeff, thank you, brother. I really appreciate you guys having me, and I love your mission here with this podcast. So I'm full of gratitude to have the moment of fellowship with y'all this morning. Thank you.
No, thank you, my man. So let's get off first by just talking about what are you up to this week? I know you are everywhere. I see you all over the place. I love it. But
everything
this week?
Well, I'm at home I live in Lake Norman, a little north of Charlotte, North Carolina is where my wife and I and our three children, Cameron, Mia, and Vivian, make our home. And this weekend, I have the great blessing of going to Tuscaloosa, Alabama for the Texas-Alabama game, which obviously is unbelievably hyped. College Game Day is there. SEC Nation is there. Marty and McGee is there. It's a cast of thousands. I think everybody that covers college football for our network is going to be there, but that just really amplifies the magnitude of this game. The game was very close 1 year ago in Austin, and had Quinn Ewers not gotten hurt, Texas quarterback, who knows what might have happened, but the Tide prevailed by a point last year, and I can't wait to see what happens this time around. I'm constantly doing feature pieces on various athletes across the college football landscape all season long for a multitude of platforms at the company, which to me is my favorite part of the job, Jeff, because I love having the opportunity and the platform to share the person. Everybody knows the player. If they're getting a feature on College Game Day, most people know about their ability between the lines, but they might not know the path that got that young man to that place. I just got the blessing of doing one on Jordan Travis, Florida State's quarterback, who had a tremendous opening weekend. Of course, the Noles beat LSU down in Orlando, and Jordan balled out. He's a young man that really inspired me. Was so down a couple years ago that he actually considered giving up the game. And then he asked his head coach, Mike Norvell, when Coach Norvell got to Tallahassee, can I please move to wide receiver? And Norvell would have none of it. He said, young man, I want you to walk out in that lobby right now, and I want you to look left. And what you're going to see is who you are. And Jordan walked out in that lobby at the FSU football facility, and what he saw were Heisman trophies. And lo and behold, here we are. And he's a Heisman caliber player for sure. And that just to me really spoke to the impact and the value and the magnitude of having someone believe in you, and how it infuses you with self-confidence and the willingness and the ability to lead and to really be your true self. So I was really filled up by getting to do that feature with Jordan and Coach Norvell. So that's kind of been my first couple weeks here of college football, and God bless it, man. I love the game so much.
Yeah. Well, and you know what's funny, as a Clemson fan, I wish I'm a little worried about in 3 weeks, so I'm kind of hoping he did move to receiver, because I'm about them coming to Death Valley.
You should be worried.
Make sure you tell Coach Sarkhi for me. You know, he was my neighbor here in Atlanta when he was with
Awesome.
the Falcons for those 2 years, and he's a good man, and he's done a great job with the Longhorns.
I'll tell you, I love Sark so much. His testimony is unbelievable with everything he's managed and his path to making his way back to prominence in the college football world. What he did at Alabama as the offensive coordinator was spectacular. It was fascinating, guys, to watch that 2020 national championship game down in Miami. And, I mean, Devontae Smith won the Heisman Trophy that year, and it was Sark devised ways. He schemed ways to get Devontae open in space, and those poor Ohio State linebackers were charged with trying to cover the best player in college football in space, and that's a bad matchup for the Buckeyes. And just a great man. I love his testimony. And, I can't wait to see what happens on Saturday when Sark comes back to T-Town to bring his Longhorns a call, and it'll be fun.
Well, Marty, like I said before the show, I'm a huge fan of yours, and what I love about you is that
Thank you.
You're always so positive. You always seem to find the good in your interviews, and with the world we live in today being so divided and so divisive, and you always have such a positive spin on things. And before we kind of get into your story, I'm a huge fan of Marty McGee. Could you give kind of a little background on you guys have such an amazing chemistry, and you just make my Saturday mornings when I'm driving around in Atlanta. So first of all, how did it get started? And second of all, did you guys have that chemistry right off the bat, or did it kind of develop over time?
It makes me giggle, honestly, because we're just a couple good old boys making noise, and we try to lay low a little bit because we're terrified of the day that the brass in Bristol, Connecticut goes, wait a minute, who the hell decided to give these two hillbillies this platform? But the show is our friendship, and the fun that we're able to have together and the silliness we're able to have together seems to be so relatable to people all over the country, not just in the South. Even though we're both from the South, we have people calling in from Vegas and LA at 4:30 in the morning Pacific time. And it blows our minds that folks are that engaged in it. But I'll tell you, fellas, anytime that I get asked about our show, I'm very quick to say this, because while we've built a beautiful business on a friendship and on the chemistry that we have together, there's also the credibility that comes with the fact that we're both national reporters in basically every sport. And so if there is a major national story, one or both of us quite possibly is actually covering it. And so that actually gives us the credibility to speak with authority on whatever that story may be. So while us cutting up and doing hillbilly headlines is the show, I think it's important to mention that. And yes, we did have that chemistry from the jump. We've known each other basically 20 years. And when we met, I was a writer for NASCAR.com. I worked for Turner Sports out of Atlanta, which at the time owned the rights to NASCAR.com. And McGee was actually the executive producer of a Fox Daily NASCAR program called Totally NASCAR. And he was one of the first people that saw something in me and thought, man, I want to put that guy on TV. And in that sort of era of my career, that 2002, 3, 4, I'm dating myself, but that 2002, 3, 4 era, I had built these amazing relationships and friendships with the stars of NASCAR, like Dale Earnhardt Jr. and Jimmy Johnson and Jeff Gordon and Tony Stewart and Kevin Harvick, and those guys that were really needle movers. And so McGee started to put me on his program in a freelance capacity to sort of be an insider, as it were, share the news and kind of what I was hearing in the garage. And then I got hired in the fall of 06 by ESPN. That's its own story, which is I will say this, God is so good. I'm a grain of sand. Jeff knows this to a degree, even I don't. But to make it to the big leagues is a grain of sand opportunity. And then to be an all-star caliber player is, I don't know how many stars are in the galaxy, but it's one of those opportunities. I kind of feel that way about my path. We can get into that in a minute. But McGee's path is not dissimilar. He was a producer, but he's a world-class writer. And ESPN, the magazine, hired him around that same time. Fast forward a couple of years, he and I were riding to Martinsville Speedway to cover a NASCAR race, and we were just cutting up in the truck together and raising a little cane and talking about how we love this country music song, or, do you remember that play? And, oh, I remember that guy's number and all that stuff. And he goes, you know what, man, this should be a show. And I just kind of cold called the ESPN podcasting unit. And for reasons unbeknownst to us to this day, that was now, I think, 12 years ago, maybe 11. This lady goes, we did like a pilot on the phone, and we both started telling stories about Dale Earnhardt. And she goes, I don't know what this is. I don't even know if I can sell it, but go do it because it intrigues me. And 18 months probably after that, they put us in the dreaded 3 to 5 p.m. ESPN radio on Saturday slot. And then a few years after that, they called and said, if you guys are willing to get up in the morning, we want to put you 7 to 10. And we knew right then. I called him and said, dude, everything just changed. Because that's when the dads are taking their sons to the ball field, or their daughters to the lacrosse field, or they're going to get the donuts, or they're going to get their wife coffee. And what do dudes do on Saturday morning? They turn on ESPN radio. And what a tremendous blessing.
3 o'clock, you're locked into football. So that's
3 o'clock is purgatory, man. It's no man's land.
Hey, you talked about that you usually ask people about their path, and so we want to get into your whole path, because it's really interesting. As we talk a lot about that, 5% of kids who play sports end up playing at college level, and then even a smaller percent at the pro level. So 95% of kids, what are they getting out of sports? And we think there's a lot. And you were in that 95% that played sports growing up in Parisburg, West Virginia.
Virginia.
What'd you say?
Virginia.
In Virginia. Sorry about that. So
that's offensive, I think, when you say that.
That's okay. That's an important correction, though.
Yeah, I was going to say, don't make me feel like I'm from West Virginia all of a sudden, man.
I love my friends in West Virginia, but I love to give them grief.
We could have edited out the West if not for all that.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm not a pro.
Take us through your childhood and your journey and what that looked like, and we'd just love to hear about that.
Well, you said it very well. What organized sports offer its participants at the youth, middle school, high school level is a set of lessons that you carry forever. And that is selflessness, that is demanding of self to find best self so that the man or woman beside you can thereby find his or her best self. It's really Saban's process. It is the daily process of doing what's right, doing it the best of your ability, the first time, all the time, so that collectively, if everyone is doing that, we have the opportunity to be great. It's like this new book I have coming out on the 26th called Sideline CEO. I love one thing that Saban says, and this is applicable to every single layer and level of athletics, and it's applicable to every single human being's life and daily walk. That is, in the Alabama football facility, the goals pyramid does not say win a championship, does not say win the SEC championship, does not say win the national championship. It says be a champion. Because if you're doing what you're supposed to do every single day to be a champion, then you might have the opportunity to win a championship. And that is applicable as a father, as a husband, as a friend, as a professional, as a peewee baseball player, as a pro ball player, and as a Christian. So it is, I remember him telling me that, and I was like, oh, man, that's good. That's really good. And, Dabo Sweeney, Jeff's boy, he says, they say it in a different way. they have their different sayings and whatnot. And of course, they have all in, and then they have best is the standard. Best is the standard at Clemson is the same thing as what I just said about be a champion at Alabama. If you strive to be your best, then you might have the opportunity to be the best. If you're worried about being the best, then you're worried about outcome over process. If you're worried about your best, then it's process over outcome. And all those, I'm such a nerd about all that leadership stuff. I love it so much. That's what that whole book I just did is. But it is so applicable. Now, my experience as an athlete, I was that guy that maybe didn't have quite as much talent as my brothers had, but nobody ever outworked me and nobody ever had more passion than me. And that still applies in my professional life right now, today. And I took so much away from the example of my hard work proving itself to me. And that happened between the lines in athletics. And it's funny, I was back home recently and saw my high school football coach. And his name is Steve Ragsdale. I wrote about him extensively at the end of this book, though he doesn't know that yet. His influence on all of us that played for him is lasting. And one of the things that I learned from him is, like, I maintain I'm the least talented starting player in my high school's history. My high school has a pretty good football program. We've won a lot of state championships and whatnot. And he pulled me aside. I lost one of my brothers, one of my best high school friends passed away recently. And I was back home to speak at his service. And my coach pulled me aside and he said, "Son, I got to talk to you about something. I'm about tired of hearing you say that you were the least talented player I ever had." I said, "Coach, it's the truth. The truth ain't always easy." But I carry that with me every day, gentlemen. And those guys that were my friends back then and my teammates back then are still my friends now. I have a text group with 30 of my high school teammates. And I don't care what I do professionally or where I go professionally or personally now, wherever my branches may extend, I'm forever rooted in Appalachia and in Parisburg.
Marty, where'd that work ethic come from?
My old man. Yeah, my dad was a hard ass. He was not a guy that tossed. I knew my father loved me more than anything in the world. And I knew my father had my back more than anybody in the world. But my dad was not around to be my friend. My dad was my dad, and he demanded of me that I had a 3.5 GPA, and he demanded of me that I give every last ounce of everything I was every play, every practice, every rep in the weight room when I was 135 pounds soaking wet. And he was smart enough to teach me, though, that while that was the standard, if I chose not to live up to it, nobody was going to suffer but me. And he didn't toss "I love yous" around all the time, but I'm going to tell y'all this. Every single ball game I played from coach pitch baseball when I was 6 years old until I finished playing ball my senior year of high school, my old man was there. And I don't care if it was a 10 o'clock in the morning Little League baseball game, a 3 o'clock in the afternoon American Legion baseball game, or Friday night in nowhere, Grayson County, Virginia. My dad was there at the 50-yard line 2.5 hours before kickoff. So he didn't have to tell me, he showed me. And that's where I got the work ethic from.
You know, you think about Marty with what, today we had Jay Billis on one time, and I loved it because he was talking about, he was awesome. And he talked about how, 3.5% of athletes only go to that next level, 4, something like that. But what I love is for all the athletes we've had on that have made it to the next level, we had Austin Eckler on the other day, and he was awesome talking about how his mindset was what you said, your work ethic. Like maybe you didn't go to college to do it, but you're living out a dream now because of that. And that's why I love youth sports. I have 4 kids, 3 of them are playing. My other one's not old enough yet. But I tell them all the time, I want you to compete and I want you to get life lessons out of that. If you get older and you get to 17, 18 years old and you have that opportunity, great. But until then, you're going to get so many work ethic, determination, grit along the way that can bring you to that next level. So as you kept going on, did you know kind of broadcasting is what you wanted to get into?
No, I'm a writer. I kind of fell into TV, but I'll tell you, fellas, I played baseball my freshman year of college at a little Division II school in East Tennessee called Carson Newman.
Oh yeah.
And then I transferred over to Radford from there. And as a conceited, egotistical young man, assumed I'd be playing ball at Radford. And that was sort of when my athletic, organized ball path ended. And you guys know this. Jeff certainly knows this, even though he had the blessing of playing at such a high level at the big league level. I don't care if your last high school football game is your last ride or you play 15 years in the NFL like Peyton Manning or 20 like Brady. When it's over, there is this odd, listless void that you got to try to figure out how to fill somehow. And you don't know how to fill it because all you've ever known is ball. And that void was very hard on me. I went through a really difficult period my sophomore year of college. And then one day, a buddy of mine was dating a girl who was working in the sports information office. And I walked in there with her at Radford University and started volunteering in sports information. And from there, my writing career took off. And I tell you that because, you know, that old adage, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I knew that I was going to play ball. Like, that's what I was going to do. And then he changed my path. And what happened? The greatest blessings in my life. I met my wife. I met my best buddies. And it set me on the course to what my career ultimately became. But Jeff, I was a writer. I started really writing professionally in college for the major newspaper in my area called the Roanoke Times, and then got the opportunity to cover Virginia Tech football as a senior in college for the Washington Post. And then I took a writing job out of college that then led to the NASCAR job, which led to the Turner Sports job, and then ultimately led to ESPN calling me in the fall of 2006 and offering me a job at the Worldwide Leader in my first TV job. And you talk about green now. I didn't know anything about how television really works. And ESPN told me, we will teach you TV. We need who and what you know in that NASCAR garage. And I'm a guy who I'd rather crash and burn and fail knowing in my soul I can't, that I'm not capable, than wonder when I'm 75 if I could have. So I jumped in with both feet and went after it.
Marty, there's a story you tell. You talk about kind of when you realize that your high school football career is over and you're staring up at a mountain at a symbol. Can you tell us that story? Because it's so poignant.
Oh man, it is so important in my town. I grew up in a Friday Night Lights town. It's one of those towns where the tradition of our football program is the identity of Parisburg, Virginia. It's one of those things where when 17-year-old boys win on Friday night, 47-year-old men win on Monday morning at work. And there's this very distinct pride that comes with it. I mean, I'm telling y'all, for 3 years of my life, I didn't pay for blizzards at the DQ. I didn't pay for haircuts down at Barton's Barbershop.
And that's
it was
too. That hair has got to be perfect.
Oh yeah, man. Back then I had one of them flat tops, back in the day. And I'm telling you, it was crazy because we'd go in there and sit down And Mr. Clay Dollinger was his name, and he'd take those clippers and he'd shave up our flat top. And we'd turn around to pay him. And the haircut was $3, by the way. We'd turn around to pay him, and Mr. Clay would say, "No, son, y'all boys just go beat Blacksburg on Friday night." We'd say, "Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Clay." But the story you're discussing, I will never forget this. My senior year of high school, we played a high school that had won 27 consecutive games. We were 13-0 at the time. And they were heavy, not that betting was a thing, but they were heavily favored. I mean, everybody expected them to just run through us like poo through a tin horn. And so we beat them. And not only did we beat them up. And it was this realization of a dream that all of us on that football team had since we were old enough to walk. Because when you're a little kid in Parisburg and Pembroke and Newport and all the little farm towns that from which my high school draws, your heroes are Giles Spartans. And so to be able to be that hero was such an unbelievable emotion. A lot of us were moved to tears. Well, that same night, the same day that we won the state championship, and I can't even imagine, boys, it was 30 years ago. You can see all this gray in my beard. But we had a winter dance. Our winter dance at our school was that night. And I walked out to my driveway, and it was snowing. It was blowing this snow sideways. And I walked out my driveway at my childhood home and to get in my diarrhea gold 2-door Chevrolet Blazer, 4 on the floor, outdoorsman model. And I looked to my right, and on top of Angel's Rest, which is one of the most prominent peaks in the Appalachian mountain chain, certainly in our area, there is a probably 5-story tall steel star. And they light the star every Christmas season. And there is a 1 in the middle of that star that had only been lit once ever in the history of my town. And that was when the 1980 team won state. And I looked to my right, and in red bulbs, that 1 was lit. I can't believe it. Boys, I got chills. I'm Buddy Garrity, I swear. I'm like, I'm straight out of Central Casting for Friday Night Lights. But
I've watched it Friday Night Lights 4 times, man. I'm the same way.
I can't even tell you how much I love that whole thing. But I was moved to tears because in that moment, I realized that light in the darkness was such unbelievable light for everybody in our town, and that we had achieved that together. And there is a great speech that Sean Payton gives in Kenny Chesney's Boys of Fall video. And if y'all don't know that, go watch it. Sean Payton says in that, he's speaking to his alma mater, and he says he's taken by how fast 27 years have passed, and that he'd give anything to be able to strap up one more time with them boys tonight. And that that entire community is living vicariously through them tonight. And it's just so true, man. And boy, I'd give anything just to if I could just strap up one more time, bust heads out there, I'd give anything, man.
Well, Marty, it's funny because these guys know it. I've played in the World Series. I've done all these things, but Friday Night Football was my most favorite time I ever had. And we still get together. We had our 40th birthday parties last year on a trip, man, and we just told stories for 5 days. And of course, a lot of them were inflated, 40 tackles a game, whatever. But
of course,
still some of the best times and the best lessons because of what you said and so, for our 5 pillars, we have belief, character, grit, skill, and vision.
Love it.
You've interviewed so many coaches, so many people. out of all those things I just told you and all the interviews you've done, who's one of the coaches that you've done your book that exemplifies that the best?
There are so many. Dabo, certainly. Shane Beamer. I didn't interview Shane for this book. I interviewed his father, Frank, who is the
Yeah.
man where I grew up.
Special team specialist, man.
He walks on water where I'm from. He's one of my greatest heroes, and I couldn't ask for a better mentor and example than Frank Beamer. Most of the coaches in my book do exemplify those things, and I'll just rattle a couple of them off for you. It's Saban, it's Sweeney, it's Mac Brown, it's Roy Williams, John Calipari, Kim Mulkey down at LSU just won her 4th national title. Patty Gasso just won her 7th for Oklahoma softball. On and on. It is these titans of leadership who they don't just win. They grow people into contributory, empathetic, kind, hardworking human beings, parents. And it's just super inspiring to me. Kirby Smart's in the book, but Urban Meyer's in the book. But you try very hard if you're in that kind of position, especially in their position, because it's so pressure filled. It's win or you're gone at that level. And so there is that crazy pressure. But, I think about Dabo and Shane specifically because I know they both do this, and I admire this so much. Both of them demand that their assistant coaches and staff members have photographs of their families above their office door or just outside their office door, so that every single morning when they wake up, they go to work, and when they walk through that door, they're reminded for whom they're doing it. And in that pressure-packed arena, I just think that is so special. Yes, winning is very important, but you are doing it for a bigger reason. And I love that so much. I try to live my life that way and be where my feet are as a husband and father. I don't always succeed because my job's got a lot of pressure too. But I try very, very hard to be that example for my kids. And I wish I was better at it sometimes when I've been on the road for 4 or 5 straight days. But I certainly offer them maximum effort in that capacity. And that's what those photos outside those offices are doing for those coaches. And so I admire that very much from those two specifically.
Yeah, that's awesome, Marty. Tell us a little more about, what can high school coaches, get out of that book? What are 2 or 3 things that really jump out for high school coaches in that book?
I broke the book's called Sideline CEO, Leadership Principles from Championship Coaches. And the way the book unfolded was sort of interesting and different. The way I broke that book up was a unique path because I had the idea all the way back in maybe 2018 because the title that's a great title, Sideline CEO, because that's what these folks are. They're CEOs of extremely lucrative businesses with again, pressure-filled itineraries and the onus to win. And so I thought it might resonate to business professionals, to other coaches, to people who can incorporate it into their daily walk. So I'm trying to figure out how to do it. And then COVID hit. And I had this, COVID was Lainey and I were very intentional when COVID first hit because it was the first time I'd ever been home as a professional for an extended period of time. So we were intentional with one another in our marriage and our time therein, and we were intentional with our children and time with them. And tried to be. And Then I can't sit still. It goes back to that work ethic. So I started to have some anxious energy. What can I control? Because I feel like every single day we control three things in a world full of uncontrollables. We control kindness, we control effort, we control passion. We decide how nice we're going to be to the people in our path that day. We decide if we're going to give every last ounce of everything we got, and we decide if we're going to have undeniable positive energy. They're ours. So I started to be like, man, how can I control something? And I thought, all right, I'm going to write that book right now. So I called Mac Brown, told him what I was doing, and he's Mac. I mean, he's like my dad. He's everybody's dad. He's a wonderful man. And 53 minutes later, I'd gone to a master class in leadership. I went, oh, this thing might have some juice here. Transcribed his interview the next day. The day after that, I called Urban. 57 minutes later, the book was undeniable. I still, fellas, did not know how to do it. Do I make every coach a chapter? What do I do? Well, going back to being intentional during COVID, I tried to read a book every 10 days so that I was not in this thing. I wanted to stay out of my phone, which is hard for us to do these days. One of the books I bought was called I Want My MTV, and it was an oral history of MTV. And the light bulb went on. This was 11:30 at night. I got up out of my bed right then and said, I know how to write this book. My wife was like, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to work. Took those two. Actually, I lied. I had also interviewed Jimbo Fisher a couple days after that. So I had 3 coaches at that time. And I broke the book up into 8 leadership pillars. First, what is leadership? Second, trust, culture, delegation, communication and listening, crisis management, self-evaluation, evolution. Because every one of those are imperative pieces of being a great leader. How do you build trust within your organization and then do it on a personal level so that you can reach every single player where they are? Because you can't do it until they trust you. And then you have communication. One of the most powerful leadership traits is a closed mouth and open ears. Because if you're not listening, to quote Roy Williams, you're not learning. Kirby Smart told me you cannot lead until you listen. Doc Rivers is another coach in this book. He told me you can't lead until you're listening to them. So all of these amazing pillars, right? All the way through self-evaluation. Jeff, nobody knows it better than you. You're sitting there watching tape. If you're in a slump, what is wrong with me right now? And it ain't fun. It's hard to be self-critical, but it's also invaluable. And then it's evolution. Classic Eckhart Tolle. If you're not evolving, you're dying. You either evolve or you die. So how are you continuing to stay relevant within the context of your leadership structure? Are you evolving to make sure you're growing? All of those things are in this book, and each of those 20 individuals are commenting on each of those pillars in multiple ways. And so, I'm extremely self-critical all the time, and I struggled with, is this working? So I had to step away from it, and then when I would step away from it and read it, I'm like, man, this thing's good. So I do believe with my whole heart that folks are going to take things away from this. It's one of those books that you're going to mark up. You're going to be highlighting and marking because of what these folks are saying. And I think the crisis management section is especially vulnerable from the participants level because you have, like, going back to Coach Brown, when he coached Cole Pittman at the University of Texas, and the Texas State Police called him, and they called him because this young man who had passed away in this horrific truck accident had on a national championship ring that said Cole Pittman. So the state police called Coach, and they said, I need you to identify this young man. And then he had to call the parents. And you think about, coaches don't sign up for that. They don't go to school for that. They don't go to class for that. But most of them at some point invariably have to manage a crisis. You have Doc Rivers sharing with me what it was like when Donald Sterling said those terrible racist remarks, and Doc was the head coach and the general manager of the LA Clippers. So he has to walk into practice without any idea what's coming, because he knew his players were going to be hurting, and he knew those players were going to view him as an extension of the ownership. I'm telling you, there is some stuff in here that is, I think, very educational and valuable to the readership.
Marty, I can't wait to read it. When I think about those pillars that you mentioned, the one that really jumps out that kind of almost as a starting point for coaches is trust. And earning the trust of the people underneath you in whatever leadership position is so key. Can you just give us a few tidbits of what you learned talking to those coaches about how they garner trust?
Very difficult to earn and very easy to lose. And so many of them shared with me that going back to that listening is a very important way to earn trust. The most important way to earn trust for the vast majority of these coaches is do what you say. Tell them what you're going to do and then follow through with it, because that's how you start to break it down. I would love to actually have a copy right here with me. I don't have it. I just got lucky. God's good. I just opened it straight to trust. One of the most important passages in this book is from Tim Corbin, Vanderbilt's head baseball coach, who was unbelievable. Do you know Tim, Jeff?
So I committed to Clemson because of Tim Corbin. He was
way.
He was the assistant under Jack Leggett, man. And
I love it.
We're still good friends today.
He's a wonderful man and was just so overwhelmingly great in this book. And when he was talking about listening, it was unreal. But his commentary on trust, I got to find this. Okay, I love this. Okay, I will paraphrase, but he says this: trust is the component needed for a relationship to move forward. My experience of being a step parent gave me a profound understanding of trust as it pertains to teaching and coaching. Maggie, who is now Coach Corbin's wife, and I dated for 4 years, and I knew I loved her, and she knew she loved me, and we both knew we were going to marry one another. But the reason we didn't marry one another sooner was because we wanted to give the relationship time with the girls, with the daughters. And the girls were young at the time. But my main thought process was, if this is really going to work and we become a family, there needs to be time taken so the girls trust me as an individual and someone who's going to be in their home. You can't rush that. I didn't try to replace anyone. I just tried to blend into the family. And when you learn to love someone else's children, it builds a philosophy of what I'm doing right now as a coach, because essentially you're taking on the responsibility of raising someone else's child. How good is that? What a stud. That guy is a stud.
I love him, man. He's so great.
Sorry, I get all fired up, boys.
No, that's
No,
great
great.
stuff.
You kind of, you make so much about the folks that you interview, and you've got that, a great access to them, but you're an inspiration to a lot of kids that would love to do what you do. And you weren't always at a place where you could pick up the phone and get a hold of Nick Saban. Can you talk about just how you, you've got such a great personality, but were you always so confident in terms of trying, when you were working at NASCAR and things like that, in terms of getting interviews, in terms of having that aggressiveness or that confidence? How did you work at that, and how did you get to where you are today, to where so many people you're endearing to them and they want to talk to you?
By no means did I always have that confidence. No. When I first started out, I was very apprehensive to interview people at all. I was apprehensive that my questions would not be well received. I was apprehensive to approach them and borrow their time, steal their time. I remember trying to interview Dale Earnhardt, and I was scared to death because he was the Dale Earnhardt. I mean, he was an intimidator, man. And I mean, he was the intimidator. And then as I walked through my path, I started to learn how to ask questions better. And I started to understand the value of brevity. In TV, brevity is king. And I will tell you, writing for television made me a much better writer in print. I still love big, powerful, descriptive sentences, but I know how to do it in a very different way because of TV. But one of the greatest lessons that I learned about interviewing people, and that self-confidence and the value of listening, came from my buddy Dale Jr. I wrote this in my first book. If you guys have read it, I think you may have. This story was in there. I had done this interview with Jeff Gordon and was super proud of this interview. Jeff has a tendency, much like myself, to ramble. And I would, when he started to kind of go off topic a little bit and share in another arena, I would kind of cut him off and steer him back where I wanted the interview to go. And when that interview aired at Loudon, New Hampshire, during the NASCAR Countdown show, I got a lot of affirmation, filled up my ego, and I was very proud of not only myself, but the work and the response to the work. After the race, I went to interview Junior, which was, basically my job for many years. He was the biggest star in the sport, and he got out of his race car, and he looked right at me. There's probably 30 reporters, and he kind of does one of these, and I'm like, me? He kind of gives me a head nod. And I walk over, and he turns his back to the other reporters. And he kind of puts his finger in my chest and said, "You need to shut up." And I went, "Excuse me?" He said, "You need to shut up." He said, "I was watching that interview you did with Jeff, and there was some things I wanted to hear him say. I wanted to hear him finish his thought, and you cut him off, and it was rude as hell. And you ought to be embarrassed." And I was embarrassed, but the only reason I was embarrassed is because I knew Junior was right. And I was mad at him now. But I was mad that my anger was the manifestation of my ego. And so I then, in that moment, completely changed my entire approach. I shut my mouth and opened my ears, and I became such a better interviewer because when you interview people for a living, the first question, which is who, what, why, when, where, you ask an open-ended question that lets that person share their truth. And then the follow-up is always the best question. Because if you share that truth with me, and then I say, how? Or I say, why? That's going to be the best soundbite in the story. And the absolute king of that is Tom Rinaldi. He is the king. So that's kind of been my path with that, but I was not confident at all to start. I am now, based on the time and the grace other people have given me and the opportunity to sit across from some of the titans of sports history.
Yeah. Marty, I'm listening to you and closing here. We appreciate your time today, man, but I got one more question for you. You've given all these other guys a lot of praise. Well, you're pretty darn good yourself at what you do and how you do it, the books you've written now. Speak real quick to the coaches and parents, because I know you have kids and, playing sports, but speak to the coaches and to the parents. What are a couple things that they can do to allow these kids to have fun?
Play multiple sports. Let them play everything. Play everything they want to play. If they're 12 years old, they don't need to pick one sport. And let them be coached, especially if you don't like it, because people want to be coached. Doc Rivers told me in the book, it is such crap, his words, that there's this narrative that people don't want to be coached. They desperately want the structure, the discipline, and the coaching. And you can work in concert with their youth coaches, but if little junior gets benched, let him. And then when you get home, ask him why. Ask him, not the coach. Because I see it. But I would say the number one thing is let them play. Because I talk to these college football coaches all the time. You look at Travis Hunter, who just had one of the greatest games in the history of college football. Played both ways, 119 snaps, or 120, whatever it was, more than 100 snaps, dominated the game, and was a high school basketball player too. And I just love that. So that would be my number one advice. And love them up. Love them up. Lead with love, but tell them, demand of them that they work if they want to achieve their goals. I think I'm going back to Saban here. Coach Saban is a genius psychologically, because the way he leads is what? I make it about the player. Because if the player defines his or her, well, in Coach's case, his goals, then are you willing to have the work ethic and discipline it takes to achieve the goals? That's a you question.
Yep. Amen, man.
So it just, I love that stuff, and I'm so grateful to you guys for letting me go on and on about it, but I love what you're doing. I appreciate it so much, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to have me on.
Man, thanks so much for being on, Marty. That's just great stuff. We can't wait for our audience to hear all this.
Yeah, Marty, thank you so much, buddy. Big fans.
Marty, man, I'll leave you with this one, man. It's pretty good. You talk about evolving and changing. I learned the hard way. You know, I swung the bat a lot. I did not take many pitches when I was at the plate. And I remember one time in 2006, they interviewed me and they asked me why my on-base percentage was so low. Well, I come back with a smart, answer. And I said, well, if on-base percentage is so important, why is it not up on the scoreboard? Fast forward now,
I love it.
And I sit up there and all I do is the on-base percentage all day. And so I agree, man. I think that's one huge thing in our culture. It's just changing all the time, and you have to be able to adapt. And I'm telling you, man, I cannot wait to read this new book. And I appreciate you spending time with us today. I know it means a lot to Britt and Brad and myself.
Well, again, means the world to me too. And I can't wait for you guys to see it. And I would love to have your feedback. And thank you, everybody, for listening. And if you get a chance to go grab the book, I'd appreciate that too.
Hey, Marty, when's the book going to be available?
September 26th. It hits stores. You can pre-order. I don't know when you guys are putting this out, but you can pre-order it now at Amazon or Books A Million or Barnes & Noble, any of those places. You can go pre-order it now.
Awesome.
Definitely. Well, Marty, listen, thank you so much, and have a great fall, and you make college football a lot more fun. Yeah. I can tell you that much.
Absolutely.
Hey, guys, Jeff Francoeur here. Thanks for checking out Pure Athlete, and subscribe to our channel on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you go to listen to our podcast.